For-profit corporations are the most effective means to solve social problems. Now, that's a statement that you could definitely argue with, and that's kind of the foundation of what this class is about, is making that argument. But from a market standpoint, which is what you're going to read about in Chapter 7, that's really the premise, right? Is that companies, for-profit companies, are the best at allocating scarce resources because they're focused a lot on their budget, on the bottom line. So they're the best at doing that. At trying to figure out how to allocate scarce resources, how to solve social problems. And certainly we have to balance that, right, with the pursuit of profit and of excess. But that's kind of the premise here when you think about, markets and the idea of what role does capitalism play in solving social problems, right, and being socially responsible. So there's a lot of interesting things in chapters 7 and 8 that you're going to read about, but let me just highlight a couple of really quick things. A couple of questions that you might think about as you're reading is, should CSR be mandatory or should it be voluntary? Should CSR reporting, what kind of standards should exist when it comes to CSR reporting? Should there be specific criteria that companies have to report on? I would encourage you this week to go and look for some examples of CSR reporting. Maybe just find some CSR reports and see what's out there. See what companies are writing about. There's some really interesting ones out there. For instance, there's even an index. I believe it's called the Equity Index, where you can go and look and see how different industries as well as specific companies, actually report on how they're meeting standards of diversity and inclusion. What kinds of policies do they have in place, for same-sex couples and those kind of things. So there's a lot of interesting things out there. The last point I want to mention, though, is to make sure that you read closely the idea of nudges. And then beyond just reading about nudges, so how do you give people slight, small cues that are going to help, that are going to hopefully nudge them, bump them in the direction. In fact, your application assignment for this week will focus on the idea of nudges, but it's really interesting. And if you find yourself particularly interested in behavioral economics, then there's some really good readings out there that I'd recommend that you look up. And Dan Ariely would be one that would be really good to look up. He's got some really good stuff out there. So anyway, enjoy the work for this week.